So I thought we could start just with settling in. I like doing 3 breaths into our 3 brains. So breath into the head, letting it settle and giving space. A breath into the heart. Giving compassion to ourselves and each other. And a breath into the guts. Honoring our intuition.
All right.
Well, I want to thank you so much for being here. I've been so excited about this. David Lesondak, if you do not know him, he is an author. He is a body worker. I have not seen anywhere else. Your podcast is one of my new favorite things, because if you want to learn about fascia research and get it into a point where people are talking about it in terms that you can comprehend and get excited about, you just have like this plethora of information. And you're coming out with the new edition of your fascia book, which I would love to hear about. David, thank you so much for being here today.
It's my absolute pleasure, Greer.
So I was looking back at your first edition of your book, and you wrote, sometimes science offers tantalizing answers, and just as often leads to even more tantalizing questions. So my first question to you is, what questions arose for you as you were making the second edition of your book?
That's a really good question. And I know that's almost a cliche. Everybody's, oh, what a great question. But that one actually is. No one's asked me that yet. So you're first.
Yeah.
So sometimes, okay, it's a little weird. People often liken writing a book and putting it out into the world is having a baby, and they're not. That's a useful metaphor. So I edited a second book after this book came out, and now I'm on the second edition of the first book. So it's sort of like, okay, this is number 3 now, oh, it's going to be another boy. So I kind of know what boys are like, but it was more about what new information do I want to be sure to include, and the first book. The first edition and the second edition, of course, as well. That book is really about my investigation over a 10-year period, 12-year period, into why this fascia stuff seems to, when properly applied, do better than everything else I've ever worked with in terms of getting the results for the people who are coming to me. And I'm somewhere in between the 2 paradigms in terms of, are you doing fix-it work, or are you trying to balance the person more? We can talk about that later. But for me, it was okay. Somebody just won the Nobel Prize for the molecule that is important to proprioception. There's a molecule involved in proprioception? I thought that was a nervous system thing. I need to dive into that and look at that a little deeper. How do I explain that? In the neuroscience chapter, I've said that this ratio between one type of brain cell and another type of brain cell is this number to this number. Now there's other people saying it's not, it's closer to a different number. Wow, if that's true, then that changes a lot of things, but we don't know if it's true yet or not. So I think for me, the second time around, the questions are, how do I stay legitimate about making sure that you understand the state of the art of the science of what I'm writing about, even when there is some very good-natured disagreement, or where it seems that things don't add up or fit together. So for me, that's where the questions came from this time. Now, when I was talking about in my introduction, as you talked about, was, when my patients would ask me questions about what we were doing and the why of what we were doing it, and I would have an answer up to a point. I'm talking 7-8 years ago. I'd be like, okay, well, this is what I can tell you, but there's still other things that I don't understand yet that I can't tell you as to why this is working better than the other things. So those were the kind of questions that drove me then, but now it's a little bit different. And of course, now we have the people who are all about, well, you can't mechanically change fascia, so why bother? Which I find interesting. I don't know that I agree with that. But that's, so I'm finding that my questions are coming from different places now than they were when I first wrote it back in 2016.
Do you have any burning questions right now that didn't get into the book that are really a big part of your curiosity in the moment?
No, I'm happy to tell you that that is not the case. Because I have, because I managed to get everything in that I thought was important. And, I'm sure there'll be something that happens in the next 6 months that'll be too late to get in there, but that'll be okay. The good news is that nothing from the first edition is inaccurate. So that's really important. There's nothing in there that needs to come out because it was wrong or because we found out that it was wrong. So that's always a good thing. So what I like to say, the second edition, which will be out in September, contains 30% more science. And there's a big section. So you want to talk about questions. The fascial net plastination project, which was a 3 or 4 year ongoing project in Germany that hit in the middle of the pandemic as well. But it was a collaboration between a team of people through the Fascia Research Society and Body Worlds to at first create proof of concept pieces. For those of you who are listening, watching, Body Worlds is that exhibit where you get to see real, live, dead human bodies doing all kinds of crazy things like playing sports, and they're presented in various ways where you can see the muscles, you can see the nerves, you can see the brain. There's one spectacular one that is just all the blood vessels of the body. They've been perfecting this kind of technique for decades now, and they make a lot of models for medical universities and schools. They have their traveling exhibits and so on and so forth. But no one had ever thought that a full fascial plastin, which is what the finished pieces are called, plastids, would be possible. And so this team called the FNPP, or the Fascial Net Plastination Project, they spent months and years creating smaller pieces at first. Like, for example, let's do the IT band, let's put it in the context of the fascia lata, let's include the tensor fascia lata in some of the gluteus medius there to show its relationship, and do that as one piece. Let's do the pericardium of the heart and do that as another piece. Let's do a cross section and show just the septums of the forearm. Let's do that as another piece. And that led finally to the creation of the first full body fascia focused plastinet. They wanted it to be all fascia, but then the problem is it would have been too, one, what was going to hold it up? And two, yeah, seriously. There's a lot of engineering in those full body pieces, and second of all, without any context, how would it be understandable? So they had to make some really interesting choices in putting this together. So I spent about 8 or 10 pages on that whole project as part of the anatomy section. There's a whole new section, or a whole expanded section, on palpation, because palpation has come under fire, I've seen. And it's why I got to tell you, I'm spending less and less time on social media because it doesn't seem to be helping. But that's where I was seeing a lot of controversy about palpation, and somebody called it palpatory pareidolia. So pareidolia is when you see a face in something that isn't there. And I think we've all had that when we're in a bathroom, in a restaurant. If people still remember going to bathrooms in restaurants, there's those coat hooks on the back, and they often look like faces. Or there's the one that's kind of shaped like this that says drunken octopus wants to box. Yeah, so that's called pareidolia. That's something that goes way back in our neurology about being able to visually recognize cues in the environment and what they may be. So somebody created this idea of palpatory pareidolia, that we're feeling under the skin what we want to feel. So we're making up a story just like we do with our eyes. But as far as I can tell, that in and of itself is an artificial construct. No one has ever proved that such a thing as palpatory pareidolia even exists. But in haptics labs, which is where they test our sense of touch and how we interact with touch screens and touch screens, things like that. They did a study that showed we are capable, and by we, I mean normal humans, not you and I and those listening who use their hands on people all day long, but that generally speaking, humans are capable of distinguishing the difference in the thickness of a substance that's only one molecular layer thicker than another. 71% of the time, they got accuracy, which is, you don't get that. Those are numbers that are very rare in science. When you get those numbers, you have to pay attention to them. So that's where it's like, okay, I don't know that I agree with that. And you're not open to new ideas. So let me do some deep diving, and let me look into people who are studying this and see what they've come up with. And so that's what kind of fuels my curiosity these days. Right now, I'm hot on gravity because I'm seeing a lot of, it's all about gravity. And so I'm taking a deep dive into a couple of books on gravity. The nice thing about gravity is there's not that many books to read about it. So that makes it really easy because we understand a lot about gravity. There's a saying that goes, the more books there are about a subject, the less we understand it. Case in point, look at diet and nutrition. So anyway, so not that gravity doesn't have an influence on the human body. It certainly does. But it sort of feels, I don't know. I remember 10 years ago, 12 years ago, Robert Schleit, who I think some of you may have heard of. He was a structural integrator. He went from being a clinician to a researcher, and he likened it to being a tennis match of ideas, and you could just sit there and watch people lob the ball back and forth. But now it seems like people want to spike the ball, and people really want to own each other, and everybody's more interested in being right than actually discussing ideas and trying to understand each other's points of view. Once you can do that, that's where innovation starts. We can have a profound disagreement about something, but if I can articulate back to you your points about the idea, and you can articulate back to me about my points of the idea, then we've got some common ground, and then we can really discuss what is and maybe what isn't.
I was really excited. I felt like in a lot of your podcasts, there was a lot of talk about leave the ego at the door, collaborating and creating. And then I was really excited to hear more because it's still going on, the International Consortium on Manual Therapy. So like getting these people from different modalities together to have a common language and talk things out. And I would love to hear more about your involvement with it and how it's going.
It's going very, very well. Thank you for asking. It's been a long 2 years working on this project, and it's more than a conference. It's actually an organization that we are designing to grow and thrive. I want to be clear about that. So what we did for the last 2 years was we got a group from 5 different disciplines together. And I was invited to join the structural integration group by Robert. Thank you, Robert. Robert always gets me into good trouble. And He's like, I cannot do it, but maybe you can. And I'm like, okay, sure. I volunteer. But it was masterminded by Brian Dengehart, who is an osteopath. So one of the groups is osteopaths. So there's a group of osteopaths, chiropractors, physical therapists, structural integrators like myself, and massage therapists. Now, these are typically 5 groups that don't always get along so well. But we have been very kindly proving them wrong, that we can get along very well. It just takes time, it takes patience, and like you said, it takes checking your ego at the door. So we spent a couple of years on 3 main questions. The first one is, what do we do with our hands? How do we explain what we do with our hands? 2, what do we say as clinicians are the mechanisms behind the results that we get? So this is right up my alley. I love that stuff. And 3, what does the science actually say? So this was a very, very long process. So each of these groups had to go and say, okay, how do I explain a HVLA, high velocity, low amplitude, traditional chiropractic adjustment? How do I explain? Well, I'm using this part of this steepling action of my hands going up the tibialis anterior, coming in at an angle and lifting up towards the kneecap while they slowly flex and extend at the knee. How do I explain that in a way that all the other groups can understand? So once we figured that out within our internal groups, we then had to present it to all the other groups, and they got to, in the very nicest way possible, go, that doesn't make sense. So when you say that, do you mean this or do you mean the other thing? That word's confusing. I'm not sure about that. So we had to kind of be willing to be that, to do our best work and then present it to everybody else and be vulnerable to their opinions and criticism. But we all had to do that. And the whole idea was to make our explanations and our understanding stronger, moving towards creating a better language. Because the problem with science, I shouldn't say the problem with science, but the thing about research and manual therapies is that if I call this an anterior tilt and this person calls it an upslip of the pelvis and that person calls it a rotation, then the researchers have no idea what we're talking about. And we sound like we don't know what we're talking about. And that goes right down to the hands-on applications to every other aspect of what we do. So the more we can succinctly in medical and scientific terms articulate what we're doing, then the better the researchers can understand it and the better we can all understand it. Because let's be honest, and I'm sure everybody's sitting out their nose right now, when you have that person walk into your room and you know the ones, it's like, oh my God, you came in at just the right time and place. And it's just like from session to session to session, boom, 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 boom. They're like a textbook case for how the work you and I do works. Others, we are part of their journey. We're not the whole enchilada for what they need. We're a big help to getting them where they need to go, but sometimes they do need physical therapy. Sometimes the chiropractic adjustment is necessary as part of their process or a series of. So the more we can understand how we work and where our strengths are and where they're not, the better we can serve the people that come to us for help. So that's the ultimate goal of the International Consortium on Manual Therapies. The website is icmtconference.org. We're halfway through the conference. It started last weekend. We were supposed to do it live. We decided not to do it live, and we found a virtual conference app called GatherTown, where you can build a virtual conference site and you get a little character that you can run around in it like Mario. It's actually really fun. And it's just like being at a conference. And we split it up over a number of days that were no longer than 6 hours because we didn't want to kill people by being on Zoom for 8 to 9 hours a day. And so far, the amount of discussion and collaboration has been fantastic. And that's what's been really unique about this conference too, is we're presenting the materials that we generated, but most of the time is spent not listening to somebody lecture you like I am now, but most of the time is spent talking to each other in these groups where we don't know each other and we're all from different disciplines, and trying to foster more of this creativity and common ground, because that's really where I think the future is. You know, I want to know better when somebody comes to see me if a massage therapist would be more important than a structural integrator. I want the chiropractor to know, gee whiz, I'm doing that same adjustment on you every week for 10 weeks and it's not sticking. Maybe I should send this person to David or to Greer. You know, this is our goal. And then the sciencey people can say, hey, you know what? This is good for this, and this. We should be recommending this stuff.
How do you feel like if you were to encourage people to, in their own communities, to go out and form these kind of conversations or communications? Do you have any advice that you would give?
I keep moving the screen around and probably making you agree is crazy. Part of it. So do I look okay?
You got a rainbow across your face.
Yeah, I see that. I see that. I am just, you know what? Hang on a second here. Technical difficulties. Please stand by. We're just gonna. I think people are used to. There we go. That's better. Hi. Wow. Okay. Well, first of all, I guess the first question is for any good therapist is, if I'm not getting the results that I think are possible for this person, what am I missing? You know, I always check in with myself first. Is there something about my approach? Is there something about their condition? What did I miss something along the way? Is there a key that I missed? The second thing is, and I think you know, and if there isn't, or if you've tried all that, it's like, okay, what else might be going on, you know, with this person? So that's what's always kind of driven that. I've been fortunate that I've been working in an interdisciplinary environment for 12 years now, which has been fantastic. So I'm used to being surrounded by people of different disciplines and so on. So that always makes it easy because I can talk to an acupuncturist during my lunch break and say, hey, what do you think about this? And she can say, hey, well, this is what I think about this. What do you think about this person? Because this is something you could help them with. So making connections is the most important thing. Go out and get some treatments. Find, go see a chiropractor in your area. Go see an acupuncturist. Go, you know, find out, are there any osteopaths in your area who actually do manual adjustments? It takes some legwork, and approach it in a way, approach it from a problem-solving point of view. Approach it from a connecting point of view, because every practitioner out there, regardless of what their discipline is, and this includes physicians, who I'm happy to work with some, they all have patients that they see that they don't know what to do. Now, not everybody is as comfortable mentioning it or mentioning it exactly those terms, but everybody does. So if your attitude and your approach is, you know, hi, you know, who are the people that you don't know what to do with? I've got some people that I don't know what to do with. What is it that you do? Be curious, be open. And I have to tell you, when I first joined the integrative medicine team back in 2008, so 14 years, I remember I became aware of the Center for Integrative Medicine in the early 2000s, and I thought, wow, they need somebody like me there, because they're missing something, and I think I'm the thing they're missing. And I was a little full of myself, and I'm glad that I didn't get my foot in the door back then, because I still kind of needed to. You know how when you're fresh out of school and you just got a head full of steam and you're going to change the world, and that's good. Keep that attitude. But yeah, what do you? Yeah. So yeah, don't lose that. Don't lose that. But you know, I've seen people do this where they come on and they're like, well, let me tell you about the thing they didn't teach you in school, because they taught me that. So let me share with you some of my secret knowledge. That doesn't get very far. And it never got very far with me either. But if you approach it from a point of friendliness and just wanting to help your own clients or patients, and being curious is to those people. Like, for example, I'll tell you one thing: concussions. I know body workers who seem to be very good with concussions. I'm not one of them. So, I do know several acupuncturists who are great with concussions. So when I have somebody come to me with a concussion or a relatively recent concussion, I'm like, you know what, why don't you go see this person or that person first? And then like, call me back in about 3 months. Things like that. So, it takes willing to be vulnerable. It takes occasionally maybe making some mistakes when you're talking to people, but it's just like meeting anybody else. And you know what? Call them up and invite them to lunch. Everybody has to eat lunch.
Yeah.
Let's eat lunch.
I love it. That's such good advice, and it makes me so happy because it like fills my heart, like community and us in it together.
Yeah, I mean, the thing we all need to realize, and I think part of the challenge is that we live and die financially by our appointment book. Most of us are not on a salary. Even at UPMC, I'm not on a salary. So there's always that balance of, well, I need to be sure that I have enough appointments coming in to pay my bills and then some. But even if you were seeing everybody that you could help, there would still be a line 5 times longer around outside your door. So we need to realize that there are always more people than we individually have the capacity to help. And if we come from that point of view, then we're going to do better. I even here in Pittsburgh, and for those of you listening, Greer and I, we practice pretty close to each other. There are people within individual communities. There are just like every other profession. Yeah, you know what, Charlie? Yeah, Charlie is really good with that thing over there. I mean, he's good with all that stuff. He's really good at that thing. It's the same thing with trigger point therapists and chiropractors and da 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 da. I think everybody has their own range of types of people and conditions that they really enjoy treating or particularly effective at. So there's plenty for everybody. We just need to get out of the scarcity mindset.
I like that notion that you talked about of kind of like also learning to understand what you're not good at and what you don't know. Because I think sometimes we forget about it.
Yeah, I used to have a doctor. He was my PCP for a lot of years, and he was never afraid to say, "I don't know," or to pull out a book and look something up in the middle of an appointment, which is a fantastic place to be. When I'm working with somebody particularly early on, and I ask them, "What do you feel?" Not how do you feel, but what do you feel? When they get off the table and they say, "I don't know," it's like, that's fine. It's okay not to know. That's an all right place to be, because that means, oh, it's not worse. I don't know if it's better. I got to figure it out. That's fine. It's okay to say to your client or patient when they ask you a question, "I don't know the answer to that, but let me think about that. Get back to you." Sometimes, there's no shame in it.
Love it. So one thing I'm really curious about, because you have such a foot into the fascia research side of things, but it's rare because there's not a lot of people with a foot in the research that also have a foot in the body work. And so I'm curious, when you learn something in one area or the other, how does that translate to you? Do you recall like, oh, I read this paper and then all of a sudden I felt the body in this new way? Or did you have something going on in the body and you're like, why is this not being researched?
Oh, wow. That's really good. I do think it's important to be open to modifying our procedures and the way we get things done based on the new knowledge that we uncover. So I'll tell you a really easy example. The RICE protocol. Okay, rest, ice, what's the C for? Do you remember? Yeah, okay, so that, and elevation. Okay, it recently came out that that's wrong. The guy who created the rice protocol said, you know what, yeah, ice maybe for the first 24 hours, like after there's been, a serious impact of that kind of thing, and there's a lot of inflammation going on. But after that, it's got to be heat. So there's a really good one. And you know what? A lot of people haven't got that memo yet. Okay, so when I have somebody saying, I ice it every day, it's like, oh, do you now? So how do you feel after you ice it? I guess I feel better. It's like, well, do you feel better, or that sort of thing. So that's where you start making different choices, or informing people differently. In terms of the body work itself, I'm trying to think of a good, clear example. I tell you where my edge is right now is working with people who are very sensitive to compression. And those people know who they are, and they'll tell you. And you need to pay attention to that. So I've been spending some time out in Arizona over the last number of years, as the world has allowed me to, learning from Chris and Ann Frederick and Frederick Stretch Therapy, Fascial Stretch Therapy, which is a different approach to working with the fascial net. And I find that gets results in ways that the hands-on that you and I do just is not possible for some of these people who are very sensitive to compression, or people who are very, very guarded in their nervous system. This approach seems to have a way of talking to the nervous system in a different way. Probably where the science has made the biggest difference has been in my understanding of what's happening with the body. So I read a lot about how there are people out there who are saying, well, you can't mechanically change fascia, it's too tough. You can't stretch fascia, it's too tough. But yet we're able to stretch within a certain parameter. And there's a reason why that fascia expands and contracts. Is it lengthening? Is it stretching? How many the angels can dance on a head of a pin, and how fast? Those questions can get really, really pointless after a while if they don't translate into getting measurable results for people. But I do think that if one of the big breakthroughs for me was understanding the cells that are responsible for generating collagen, for building the collagen in your body, which is an ongoing process of turning over old collagen, building new collagen, just like all the cells in your bodies die off and are replaced by new cells. It fascinated me even before I did body work, the idea that we regenerated new cells, and how do we regenerate new cells in healthier patterns. The cells that build collagen in your body respond to chemical messages like all cells in the body do, but they also respond to vibration and pressure. So they're called mechanosensitive cells. So when we are doing our body work, we are having an effect on the body on the cellular level with these cells that listen for those signals. And these cells, called fibroblasts, have little antennas that actually connect to the fascia net. And when they feel that pull on the fascial net, just like a spider in the web, they respond to that mechanical pull, and their behavior has the potential to change. So when somebody says, well, you can't change fascia, but yet if I work on the gastrocnemius fascia in my brain, and then behind the knee and into the hamstring and the sacrotuberous ligament and the lumbodorsal fascia, and I work in a sequential way, in a systematic way through the body, and I do one side of the body, I have changed the mechanical information to that, potentially to that side of the body, then in the other side of the body. That, and of course I'm going to do the other side. But the point being that if I can give somebody a little ease of tension, a little freedom of movement, and draw that to their attention so that they start behaving differently in between visits, that in my understanding of the science, gives the potential for the body to begin to reorganize itself in a profound way over weeks and months, not in that immediate short-term gain. So what that's done for me in my confidence when somebody comes and presents me with a problem has been huge. I don't think anybody, when they come to see you, when they come to see anybody, wants to hear, well, that's potentially possible that I could help you with that. We're going to try it and see what happens. As opposed to, you know what, I've helped with that problem before, and I think I can help you too. Let's do 1 or 2 treatments and see where you get from there. You have to be confident that that feeds on itself. People want to feel like you know what you're doing. And not everybody wants a level of explanation to the degree that I just gave you. But if somebody wants that degree of explanation, I can go all the way down there if they want. I can give them a simplified version if they want. And that also builds confidence. So one of the biggest things that having a foundation in science and being able to talk about it on multiple levels has given me the ability to connect with my patients so much better. And just that connection alone creates a better relationship. And there's something about that relationship that gets better results. Absolutely.
Sounds like also, it's like you're also educating your clients to be more empowered and to know more about what's going on in their bodies, which I think.
Well, I certainly try to. I certainly try to.
So I'm just looking and making sure I didn't miss any really important questions.
Okay.
So one thing that I really wanted to ask, that was a great talk that you did on your podcast with Carol Davis. And it was talking about some of those struggles with studying the body, because there's so many different factors in people's environment and what they're doing. And like, even as you talked about, like you might do something on a client and then like 6 months later, it might be like showing more and more results. So there's like these long studies as well. So what do you think is going on in the field of research that could be improved with studying the body?
Well, we need to get better at understanding how to create studies that deal for complex multifactorial systems like the body.
That's a better way to say it.
Yeah. Thank you. And the NIH, and if this is, like I said, this is my jam. So, you know, if it's not your jam, that's okay too. But the NCCIH, the National Center for Complementary and Integrative Health, did a workshop recently. When they say a workshop, it's like a 2 full days of different people giving their perspectives on exactly how to start designing studies that can be more effective for these kind of complex situations. And it involves everything from automated artificial intelligence data collection to better protocols for designing the experiments. And I'll send you a link to that, and you can put it in the show notes if you like. They also did a wonderful 2-day seminar on myofascial pain syndrome, where I was honored to be one of the invited speakers, along with some amazing people. So if the National Institute of Health is starting to study this, that's going to be a game changer. And because that's going to help push the ball forward into, because one of the things about studies that involve stretching or about this and about that is people who really spend the time looking through them is that they realize that there aren't a lot of good high quality studies, meaning that the parameters that are set are not always the best parameters. And I can think back to 30 years ago when I was a struggling massage therapist. And I read this study that massage therapy doesn't improve circulation. So I thought, oh, that's weird, because I don't think that can be right. So I got the study and I read it, and the technique used was light effleurage. Well, of course, that's not going to improve circulation. So that's what I mean by poorly designed studies. Now, was that a deliberate choice because somebody wanted to prove that it didn't because they had an axe to grind? Probably not. Was it chosen arbitrarily by someone who really didn't understand the parameters? Maybe. Would a better study have been, we're going to take this group and do light effleurage, we're going to take this group and do petrissage, we're going to take this group and do Tapotement or something? Yeah, that probably would have been a better study. And that's what I mean about better design. People who are coming at this without any input from the field that they're studying, i.e. clinicians, are not always going to design a test that's going to get results that are usable. And that's another thing that we're trying to do in the ICMT, is really foster that collaborative environment between people who put their hands on people every day and the people who research this stuff, and get us doing more of this.
Do you have any suggestions if like people are interested and wanting to be a part of that conversation or be a part of research? Any
Well, that's a very good question. If you're somebody who likes to read research, I recommend that you go to researchgate.net, which is like social media for researchers. So if and you can follow different researchers, and when they publish something, it shows up, and you can request, can I get a copy of this paper? And more often than not, they will send it to you. It's really cool. And you can search for topics. You can go to PubMed, 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 and you can search by topics. You can set in a profile. You can set in different parameters, and again, it will push information to you as it becomes available. If you've got a good medical university or school in your area, look into it. Look at the people who are doing research. Find out if they have a medical library. Get friendly with the medical library. Things like that. If you're curious and you want to learn more, find out who the other people in the area who are curious and learning more. And what I would say is, if what I've said about the ICMT conference is of interest to you, definitely visit the website and sign up for our newsletter. Because we're going to continue to do events on a quarterly basis. That's news we haven't put out there yet, but
breaking news.
Spoiler alert, yeah. We're going to be doing quarterly events along with these annual conferences. So we're going to have another one in 2023. Our first in-person one is planned for 2024. So this is an organization that we're looking for your involvement. So there'll be information on that in the show notes too.
Yes. And now something that because I sometimes struggle when I'm reading a science paper.
We all do.
And I would love to know like your process of like, I know like looking to see like where the funding's coming from, what kind of research it is. What do you look at when you look at a science paper to see?
I love this question. I love this question. So when I read a science paper, the first thing I do is I print it out. Okay. And then I get my highlighter marker. Now, if you want to keep it as a PDF and highlight it on your screen because that works better for you, that's fine. I like a printout. And the first thing I do is I read the introduction, and anything that really pops out at me is like, wow, that's really cool. Or, how do they know that? I highlight that passage, and usually there's the parens with the reference. Okay, so I make sure to include that. So I'll read through the introduction. I'll kind of peruse the following pages. I'll look at the conclusion and the discussion points. And then I'll go back and start again and really dive deep into the body of it. A lot of the experiment setup, the design is the chewiest part. That's the hardest part for most people to read, because that's where they're trying to explain, here's how we set this up. Here's how we built this container to analyze and understand, so that we're trying to get as unbiased results as possible. That can sometimes take 2 or 3 readings. But in that introduction, there's a lot of interesting things. So here's a classic example. if I see some really bold statements that I like, I look at the references in the back. Where did this information come from? Okay, if there's, I'm gonna go and I'm gonna look up that piece of information and see where that came from and see where that came from. So you have to kind of go a couple of layers in. Particularly, like I said, if it's something that sounds really cool, but I'm not sure is true. And sometimes you'll find that that references, they start referencing the same thing. Or if you find a particular author who references prior papers that they've already written, that's a big red flag, because that's not considered good science. You know, it's like, well, just read my 10 other papers where I told you about this, and you'll see that the statement is correct. Well, nobody else seems to be independently verifying that. That's not always so good. So that's key. Are there terms here I don't understand? Okay, if there's a term here I don't understand, I'm going to go look it up, and I'm going to look it up on multiple sources. I'll look it up on Wikipedia. I'll look it up in my medical dictionary. I'll go on YouTube and see, okay, are there several videos that explain what this science or medical concept is? And I'll watch several of them and say, oh, okay, I got that concept now. So, and of course, the more you do that, then it becomes part of your baseline knowledge. But that to me is a big part of it. If I don't understand what I'm reading because I don't understand the vocabulary that's being used, I need to look up those vocabulary words. Then I can get through it better. And so on and so forth. So that's the key thing to me, is printing it out and having a highlighter and checking their references. And I've done this, Greer. I've gotten papers that did not always have good references. Or when I went back and looked at the references, by my reading, the references didn't say what the author of the paper referencing said they said. It's a little bit like interpreting the Bible sometimes.
Making me think of a job interview, like your references aren't matching up with what you're saying.
yeah. So it can be very time consuming. It can be very time consuming. You know, and the other thing that I like to do is, you know, there are, you know, I've always enjoyed people who were good science communicators, even from the time that I was a kid. So I look for people in the field who explain things in a way that I trust, and that if I don't absolutely understand, I can at least follow them and make notes about looking up the things that I don't understand. And in general, I look for people who talk about science in ways that are understandable, that also give me a lens into how to think that way. My friend, the late Tom Finley, who was very, very big in, he was a physician who was also a structural integrator, and him and Robert Schleit put together the initial fascia congresses, was my personal mentor, along with Robert in that way. But so are people like Neil deGrasse Tyson, who was really, 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 really good at talking about science and letting you understand his thought processes of how to think about the things that you understand and that you read. That makes me better at what I do. So who are the voices that you trust? Who are the voices that seem to make sense? And if there's a voice that you like that says or puts something out there that you're like, I'm not sure that I agree with that. Like, yeah, okay, that's good. I'm not sure about that over there. That's okay. That's called being an independent thinker. And we need to do that. It's okay to say, you know, I'm fine with point 1, I'm fine with point 2. I'm not sure about point 3. So it's okay to be questioning and to even be a little skeptical. I think that's healthy. You know, we all want what we believe is true to be true. It's not always going to be. And I think the key is when we find something that when we discover something that turns out not to be true, like, you know what, you can't change the IT band. The IT band is not meant to stretch. You're not going to roll out your IT band and lengthen it. No way, no how. So getting back to that question you asked me way back when, how did that change my work? Well, you know what? I don't really work the IT band directly anymore. I work on the margins of it. Maybe I might do a nice compression stroke down it that is not painful, just to give it some tactile stimulation to make the person on the table feel like, okay, hey, he knows where my IT band is, great. But I'm going to work the margins of the IT band. I'm going to work the lateral aspect. I'm going to work the more posterior aspect and make sure that it is not densified or adhesed in any way to the quadriceps in front or the hamstrings more in the back, so that it's sliding properly. Because the IT band isn't meant to stretch, it's meant to hold us upright when we're walking. So that is one of the biggest places where new information changed how I work things.
That's wonderful. I feel like so excited that you are doing talks in your podcast. I know Robert Schleip's talks and books, and people in the fascia conference, when I hear people talk about science, it makes it so it's so much more approachable. And then hearing your tips has me really excited too, to feel more confident, not coming from a science background, to dive deeper into the science research. So
yeah,
thank you.
Well, you're welcome. It's my absolute pleasure. I mean, all of these therapies derived from usually a particular individual who obviously had a profound ability to go in and create a physical change, and then had to figure out how to teach that to other people. So, very often the approaches and the techniques preceded any sort of, oh, there's the scientific discovery, let's apply that to humans and make their lives better. It happened very much in reverse. So the cart was before the horse in this case. And now we live in the world of branding. And you know what? To me, the more we understand the anatomy behind what we're doing, the more we understand the physiology behind what we're doing, the more we understand how the body's put together and how it works in general and specifically. So, how you treat a high performance athlete, their bodies can be a little bit different than the average person who comes to see us. The better informed we're going to be in getting the best results possible. So I want to thank you for this opportunity, because that's just, I think this got away from me a little bit, Greer. I was going somewhere and I lost my direction.
That's where the best stuff comes from sometimes. You gotta get lost.
Yeah. I think we should have ended on the other thing. I think we should have ended.
Well,
but
if you have a second,
I guess, yeah. I do.
If you have a second, I would love to know, because I love asking this of body workers. Is there a technique right now that you think, oh my God, I wish other people knew this, or a philosophy, or just something you're excited about in your body work right now?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I am really excited about the fascial stretch therapy, which, by the way, is being rebranded as Frederick Stretch Therapy, because that's their last name and it's a thing. I don't have time to get into the whys, because it has a way of working with the body, going places that I can't reach with my hands, and being effective in ways that I can't be with my hands, depending on the state of people's nervous systems and their guarding when they come in, and how to blend that with what I already know. It's the old hammer and nail thing. So the foundation is my understanding of anatomy and how the body works and how the body can change. And I do have, as you do as a structural integrator, a step-by-step approach on how to inculcate that change, but not everybody's going to fit into that the same way. And particularly in the economy, Nothing upsets me more when somebody says, well, they told me they wouldn't see me because I had to commit to 11 sessions. Come in, let's do one and let's see what response you get. Then we'll talk about the other stuff, okay? You got to meet people where they're at. So to me, the tractioning, the slow tractioning, stretching, talking to the nervous system thing is the most exciting thing that I'm incorporating into what I already do. And the other thing for me, as always, is how can I really connect with the person who's sitting in front of me? You know, what's, you know, how can I really make a connection with this person as a person? That's always the particular fun point for me.
Beautiful. Sign me up. I'll be over right now.
Okay, great, great.
Well, David, thank you so, so much. This has been such a pleasure and so informative, and I will, so much good information that I will make sure to include in the show notes as well.
Okay, I'll be sure to get you those links right out.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.